Okay, this Sif Zayin, Shin Vav Zayin, is a very interesting, also a very relevant halacha, whether or not you're allowed to measure things on Shabbos. Medida. So Medida, let's take a look. It says the Mechaba, Muta limdoid b'Shabbos, Medida shal mitzvah. Generally speaking, measuring is not allowed, because we'll see what the issue is, because it's just measuring is a weekday uvda d'chol activity. However, if it's for a mitzvah purpose, it's allowed. Now, this has actually quite a lot of application on Shabbos, as we'll see. Muta limdoid b'Shabbos medida shel mitzvah. You're allowed to do a mitzvah measuring on Shabbos. Kagoyin limdoid yesh b'mikvah aboim sa. You want to measure if the mikvah has 40 sa. For limdoid ezer, and to measure the belt mishu chayla of someone who is sick, v'lil chaysh olav, and to daven for him, so I'm not familiar with that practice at all, but you measure the belt of a chayla to daven for him, whatever that is, but that's considered the mitzvah. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah and some of the applications of this today. Medida shel mitzvah. Mitzvah. Normally speaking, a drabanan, which medida measuring is not allowed l'tzorech mitzvah. Or k'misha kosavnu le'el b'sif cotton chavches. Shani medida d'lehavi issa kolkach. Measuring something is not really an issa. Ela mishum d'havi uvda d'chol. It's considered a weekday activity, but the hachishar b'mokam mitzvah, and that is allowed b'mokam mitzvah. Now, interestingly, in Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen's Sefer, the Shabbos Home, in the first volume, on page 22, he's got a very interesting note. He says, how do you define uvda d'chol? What is uvda d'chol? So he says, uvda d'chol is a category that includes three types of activities. A, activities that resemble melacha. B, activities that might lead to melacha. And C, activities that detract from the holy and elevated aura of Shabbos. Okay, that's a good definition of what uvda d'chol is. Now let's go and see how the application of this. Sivkot and Lamatei, Kagoin Limdoid. So you're allowed to measure a mikvah on Shabbos to see if it has 40 saw, if it's got the right shear in it. Fuadin Demuta Limdoid Choir Sheyesh B'Kaisel Hifsik. You want to measure a hole in a wall, Im Yesh B'Pesech Tefach. If there is a tefach, what nafkamina? Lahavi Atuma Mecheda Shameis B'Lecheda Hasamachloi. Whether the tumah from the room where there is a mace is going to go through this hole. If it's less than a tefach, then it will pass through. Even though Kohanim could just leave the room, nevertheless, since this is considered a holy mitzvah matter to see if the Kohanim are going to become Tomei or not, whether they can stay in that room, that's not considered uvda d'chol to measure to measure if this hole has got a tefach. A bit of milk falls in the chulent, and you want to know if there's 60 times the amount of milk that falls in, you're allowed to take your tape measure out or scales or whatever it is to measure it. Okay, again, not electric scales. We'll see that in a second. Shel mitzvah, the medida refuah. So this, measuring the belt is considered the medida shel mitzvah. The medida refuahi, because there the measuring is from therapeutic medical purposes. For refuah saguf mitzvah, and that's considered the mitzvah. There's no general problem of a shchika samonim of grinding, which is generally the problem of refuah. That's only when there's proper medication. But here you're just measuring a belt. That's not really considered refuah. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the footnotes. So footnote 29, a very interesting one. That's not allowed. Okay, just to measure, we said that's uvda d'chol, that's not allowed. If you go to the next paragraph, now what about measuring 2,000 amma? Let's say you're in the countryside or in the summer holidays, you're in a cottage, and you want to measure your tchum, how far you can walk on Shabbos. So he says, alpaim amma al dehiluch alpaim pesias, by taking literally 2,000 steps. That's what an amma is. A step is an amma approximately. So you're allowed to measure your 2,000 amas by taking footsteps, and furthermore, v'limdoid as goydel hacherde alidei spheres hamiritzbus. So Rabbi Zalman says, ein nechshel k'medida. So you want to see how big is this room? How many meters is it? And you take footsteps to approximately gauge the room. That's also allowed. And then jumping to the next paragraph, v'lemalois kli hamyuchad l'medida kasav l'kamon she'ein nira k'uvdin d'chol umuta. So, for example, you've got like a measuring jug. You want to use that on Shabbos, not to measure, but just to use it. That's considered okay. Now, also a very interesting shaila is, let's go down. We'll see in a second. For a chayla, the next paragraph, about halfway down the page. So you're allowed to take the temperature of a person who's not well. However, he says also to be machmir that, but you shouldn't use an electrical temperature gauge. Just use a mechanical one, the old, the mercury ones. There are the other ones you can use, but not an electrical one. He says to measure food or liquids for a chayla on Yom Kippur that he's got to eat or drink shiurim, then that is allowed to measure. Again, it's medida shel mitzvah. For a child, he's got to drink, or he or she have got to drink a certain amount, and you want to know how much the child has drunk. That is also considered okay. It's a medida shel mitzvah. You got to know how much that's allowed. Now, interestingly, what about using a sand timer to measure time? Now, you're playing a game, Friday night, a long Friday night, you're sitting down with the kids playing a game. What about using a sand timer, one of those games like Articulate or something like that, you've got whatever it is. So is that allowed? So Shlomo Zalman says, and other poskim say it's mutter. Now what's the svara for it that it's mutter? So he gives a regular shmaka svara. He says because you're not measuring time, you're just basically, it's just to show when the next player's turn starts, when your turn is over. So, for example, your sand timer, is it 60 seconds, is it 90 seconds, is it 120 seconds? You probably don't even know. But the point is it's enough time to have your turn and then to show that it's the next guy's turn. So therefore, there are many poskim who allow sand timers and it's not caught by medida shel mitzvah. So interesting application of this halacha. So again,
What's the reason? Why can't you measure in the first place?
So it's considered uvda dechol. It's like a weekday activity, and
that's not considered measuring.
Yeah, and that's not considered measuring. So just to summarize, Siv Zayin, you're allowed to measure medida shel mitzvah, and there are many applications of this. Ordinarily, just some measuring is considered uvda dechol, a weekday activity, and there are loads of applications to measure. The mikveh has 40 sah, 2,000 amos, how far you can walk, to the edge of the city, beyond the till the tchum of the city, to measure for a chayle on Yom Kippur what shiurim are, what he can drink or eat, or for a child or things like that, to take a temperature, but not with an electrical gauge. And also to sand timers, there are plenty who are poskim who are matir it, because you're not measuring time, you're just you want to just show when the player's turn is over. Okay.
Good.